everybody, and welcome back to Feeling Seen, the podcast that talks about the movies that make us feel seen. And my guest today is, as I always like to say of those who have podcasts, a colleague, really, in the industry. He is the founder of the Optimism Institute. He is the host of the Blue Sky podcast within the Optimism Institute. He has a long career leading companies you've heard of. He was there at the founding of Turner Classic Movies of TCM. He ran the Weather Channel. He's been in charge of a lot of things. He's now sharing the concept of blue sky considerations and optimism for a venture he's founded. Bill Burke, tell us about the Optimism Institute, and I would love to know how your path informed your arrival at this sort of evangelism of uplift.
Sure, and thanks, Jordan, for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be here. Yeah, so I have a long background mostly in the media business. Like you said, I started out right out of business school at Turner Broadcasting when it was kind of the Wild West, early days of cable, and we were trying new things. And I was fortunate enough to sort of stumble into being the first general manager of Turner Classic Movies. There was a TBS Superstation there as well. Like you said, the Weather Channel, a few other jobs in media. And also, it sort of fell in my lap. Ted Turner asked me to ghostwrite his autobiography, which I did which came out in 2008.
Oh my God, we have so much in common. Same. I'm a ghostwriter for Ted Turner. Wild.
But there are a lot of great things about that. It was an incredible ride, and it was really fun, and he's an amazing person. It also got me into storytelling, which is probably my I don't know if it's my strength, but it's something I really enjoy doing. And so from there, with a friend, co-produced a documentary feature film on the auto bailout. And then in 2022, my wife and I did a year-long academic fellowship with a group, about 45 fellows from all over the world. And you're there to work on social impact ventures, trying to do something to improve the world. And I got this idea that we have a real challenge these days of staying at all optimistic. We tend to doom scroll and pull ourselves down into despair, and I think that's actually not a great place to be for a number of reasons. And so I tried to combine my love for storytelling and interviewing. I've interviewed a lot of people between the book and the documentary, and started this podcast in early 2023. Once a week, where I'm up to about 60 episodes. I've interviewed all kinds of fascinating people, and I'm having a terrific time doing it. And I'm meeting people like yourself, too. It's, like you said, there's this fun little ecosphere of podcasters out there, and I've really enjoyed it. So that's it in a nutshell.
I feel like many would say, like, coming out of a career in media, a bold move to find a venture rooted in optimism.
Well, that's part of it too. I think I feel a little guilty because I think the media drives a lot of this, both traditional media and certainly social media, and especially the news networks. They really thrive on the old "if it bleeds, it leads," and there's so many great stories out there that don't get told, and I've had a lot of fun searching them out and then telling them.
Well, perhaps in the vein of a post you held long ago, being first general manager of TCM, you've brought in, if that is a theme, you've brought a thematically appropriate movie and character. Tell us who you have chosen to discuss today on the Feelings Pod.
Yes, and I do this with some self-consciousness because this character is a far better human being than I am, but there were parts of this character that made me feel seen. My movie is 12 Angry Men, the original. And my character, his character was juror number 8. They don't even reveal the names of the characters except 2 of them at the very end of the film. It's played by Henry Fonda, and he is just one of the jurors. There are 12 angry men in a room deciding the fate of this. I think he's 18-year-old, possibly killed his father. And the first time they vote, it's 11 guilty. And Henry Fonda is the one not guilty. And the rest of the film is basically the deliberations of this jury.
11 guilty, 1 not guilty. Well, now we know where we are.
Boy, oh boy, there's always one.
So, what are we doing now?
I guess we talk.
Boy, oh boy.
You really think he's innocent?
I don't know.
I mean, you sat in court with the rest of us. You heard what we did. The kid's a dangerous killer. You could see it.
He's 18 years old.
Well, that's old enough. He stabbed his own father 4 inches into the chest. They proved it a dozen different ways in court. Would you like me to list them for you?
No. Then what do you want? I just want to talk.
Well, what's there to talk about? 11 men in here think he's guilty. No one had to think about it twice except you.
I want to ask you something. Do you believe his story? I don't know whether I believe it or not. Maybe I don't.
So how come you vote not guilty?
Well, there were 11 votes for guilty. It's not easy to raise my hand and send a boy off to die without talking about it first.
It's an hour and 37 minutes. I feel like you think of a movie like this and sort of its weight and import, and you're like, oh man, this is going to be a 2 hour and 20 minute slugfest. And it's not. Like, movies weren't as, I feel like the runtime has crept up sort of on average. And what is packed into this hour and a half? Like, my wife is younger than me, and we live with her dear and darling best friend, and they're both younger than me. And so when I tell them I'm going to watch it, I'm like, I'm going to watch an old movie tonight. Would you like to participate in that? And it's like, well, how old? I'm like, 1957. And my wife's like, ancient. I'm like, you bet it is. You don't have to watch it. I can do this with my headphones on. God, it is still so good. And like, even
it's
how you know it's going to go, it is. I mean, the conceit just doesn't get old. Because like, the idea of a bunch of men yelling about your rights without you feels still very appropriate. And also just like, it's a character study. Like in the 12 Angry Men, you have 12 very sort of defined roles that each of them is going to play. And you watch it and you're like, this is Crossfire of 1957. Like, this is nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you have these themes you hit on a little bit. But a lot of themes that are still very relevant today. There's thoughts on immigration and these people. They keep coming with those people because the kid who does the murder, they don't really identify they're very careful with the language. He's clearly, grows up in a
slum.
They don't use the word slum. Yeah, and those people.
He was born in a slum. Slums are breeding grounds for criminals. I know it, and so do you. It's no secret children from slum backgrounds are potential menaces to society. Now, I think...
Brother, you can say that again. The kids who crawl out of these places are real trash. I don't want any part of them, I'm telling you.
Listen, I've lived in a slum all my life.
Wait a minute.
Please, I've played in backyards that were filled with garbage. I mean, maybe you can still smell it on me.
Now listen, Sonny.
Come on now, there's nothing personal
Oh,
about
there
this.
was something personal. Come on, fella, he didn't mean you. Let's not be so sensitive.
This sensitivity I can understand.
And then you find out that the Jack Klugman character. By the way, the cast is lights out. The cast is unbelievable. And so Jack Klugman reveals at one point, well, that's where I grew up, And then there's a guy with an accent. And it's funny. At one point, some guy refers to him possibly as European. To me, it sounded a little more like a Spanish accent. He could be from Spain. I don't know. But there's all these biases and prejudices, and then. But then Henry Fonda, and one of the things I appreciate about him is he kept coming back to sort of what's their role, how does the American justice system work, and the big catch is that this has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. This young man, it's a capital crime. He's going to go to the electric chair if they convict him. And one of the cool things I think is by the end of the movie, you don't really know for sure whether or not he committed the murder.
No,
he might have, But they find in the course of the film all these reasons for reasonable doubt, and so they do their job. Spoiler alert. They slowly – can I spoil this? They slowly move over.
You kind of see it coming. Years.
You kind of see it coming. By the end, they decide not guilty. Another thing they do, Jordan, I thought was just amazing. I mean, I think there might be three sets. Basically, most of it's in the jury room. There's this brief thing in the bathroom where these little bathroom conversations.
Yeah.
It's basically in this one room. And there's some other old movies that do this. You could just feel how hot it is. It's like this hot night. They're all sweating and dabbing themselves. And then it rains.
Their shirts are slowly just getting the sweat patches on them.
Yeah. And you watch it today, I'm like, they're not even loosening their ties. I'm like, come on, guys.
That guy's got his hat on the whole movie.
Oh, the hat.
Jack Lorden could take his hat off, and it would help a lot. But this is 1957. That hat's not going anywhere.
No. And the wardrobes are fantastic. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but Henry Fonda has the white suit. So in the very, very early on, he sort of looks like the stereotypical, white-hatted cowboy, like the good guy. Great-looking suit, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I was looking at every closer shot. I was like, I want every watch in this movie. Find me every watch. And like these guys bought those watches for $10, and I'm like, oh my God, I want these.
Yeah, and I had to look it up too. Henry Fonda, when he played this role, was younger than I am today.
Everybody looked 60 in that era.
Something happened. And here's how you can get young people to watch. Ed Begley Jr.'s father is in the movie.
Ed Begley is in it, playing
There's your
the
hook.
most disgusting character in the
he's
entire
awful.
movie.
And great. I mean, the acting is so good. This guy, Lee J. Cobb, and I'm trying to remember what else I've seen him in.
Oh, my God. One of the great all-time shouters on screen ever.
Brother, you really are something. You sit here, vote guilty like the rest of us, then some golden-voiced preacher starts tearing your poor heart out about some underprivileged kid just couldn't help becoming a murderer, and you change your vote. If that isn't the most sickening... Why don't you drop a quarter in this collection box?
Oh, now just wait a minute. Listen, you can't talk to me like that. No, who do you think you are?
Calm down.
No, what does he think he is?
It doesn't matter. He's very excitable. Sit down.
Excitable? You bet I'm excitable. We're trying to put a guilty man in the chair where he belongs. Someone starts telling us fairy tales and we're listening.
Hey, come on, huh?
So in rewatching it, I did rewatch it because I picked this character and then I rewatched it and I thought, oh, he's way better than I am. But a couple of ways I felt seen. One was that in leadership roles that I've had, and one of the interesting things about this, he's not the leader. He's not even the foreman. He's just one of the jurors.
Oh, the foreman's doing so much. He's doing so good. He's working so
he's
hard
such a
to keep
nice guy.
To keep these
Love the
bastards
foreman.
in check.
Love the foreman. But I've had roles too with especially like nonprofit boards, right, where you're sitting around a table. There's no one's really the boss. You're not even getting paid. You're just there to. But you're trying to corral people towards a unified decision. And watching, very quickly you can see Henry Fonda observing, and he's trying to figure out where this person's coming from. One of the first things he does that I love, he puts himself in the shoes of the kid who's been accused. Mm-hmm. It's one of the very first things he says. He's like, well, here's a kid who's been beaten up his whole life.
Yeah. I kept putting myself in the kid's place. I'd have asked for another lawyer, I think. I mean, if I was on trial for my life, I'd want my lawyer to tear the prosecution witnesses to shreds, or at least try to. Look, there was one alleged eyewitness to this killing. Someone else claims he heard the killing, saw the boy run out afterwards, and there was a lot of circumstantial evidence. But actually, those two witnesses were the entire case for the prosecution. Supposing they're wrong.
What do you mean, supposing they're wrong? What's the point of having witnesses at all?
Could they be wrong?
What are you trying to say? Those people sat on the stand under oath.
They're only people. People make mistakes. Could they be wrong?
Well, no, I don't think so.
You know so.
Oh, come on. Nobody can know a thing like that. This isn't an exact science.
That's right. It isn't.
All of a sudden, the sympathy shifts because all 12 of these guys, or 11 of them at least, come in like this kid's a bad kid and he's guilty. He very quickly puts yourself in the shoes of that person. And then as the film goes, you can see him sort of sizing up where the not vulnerabilities, but where he might be able to sway somebody and push. And then you figure out that this Lee Cobb character's clearly got some issue with his own son that's playing out. Very powerful. Then you find out that Jack Klugman is also one of them, who grew up in the slum, and he comes over. It's a beautiful thing to watch. Sidney Lumet is the name we haven't mentioned. He's the director, one of the all-time greats. And and you mentioned the length. One of the reasons I love some of these old movies, and this wouldn't be film noir, but particularly in the film noir, the sort of words per minute and the scripts are just so tight. There's no wasted anything. There's a fair number of quiet moments in this movie. Very subtle score.
Even within an hour 37, they take these asides for people, just guys sort of standing looking out at the rain together.
Yeah. And you just feel hot. and watching it again, too, I could sympathize with the other characters, too. The guy's got baseball tickets. It's like, come on, this guy's guilty. But there's something about Henry Fonda just imploring them to do their job, to uphold the legal system. And in particular, the guy with the accent, who was he was one who said, in this country, this is really important.
Yeah.
That was a beautiful scene where he's like, how can you just change your vote because you feel like it? I need a reason. This is what this country's all about. This is what makes this country great. I thought that was beautiful. It's a great movie.
What kind of a man are you? You have sat here and voted guilty with everyone else because there are some baseball tickets burning a hole in your pocket. And now you have changed your vote because you say you're sick of all the talking here?
Now, listen, buddy.
Who tells you that you have the right to play like this with a man's life? Don't you care?
Now, wait a minute. You can't talk like that to me.
I can talk like that to you. If you want to vote not guilty, then do it because you are convinced the man is not guilty, not because you've had enough. And if you think he is guilty, then vote that way. Or don't you have the guts to do what you think is right?
I wondered if, like, what you were saying, like, being in these capacities where I would imagine you're sitting in a room with a dozen or so people. And is it a space where you find, like, did you feel like you had to lean into a role, if this is something you've identified with, where it has to be like, hey, well, let's, like, consider for a moment an unpopular opinion? Or, like, is there, when you have a setting of executives of that level, people of that sort of professional category, do people tend to want to assert their individualism in that space? Or does there tend to be an alignment toward a group sentiment, either for expeditiousness or for a sense of just like that's kind of a natural human response to kind of go with the crowd? Like, how do you find that group dynamic has played out in the situation that you've been in it? Like, is there a sort of way that it tends to go?
I've seen them all. You have groups that are, the quote-unquote rubber stamp boards who, the CEO makes a recommendation, everybody says okay. You have others where it's just kind of chaos and you have to sort of try to coalesce and move towards one difference is in most cases it doesn't have to be unanimous. If you can at least get it moving to a point. Or if you have a somewhat autocratic leader like a Ted Turner who I worked for, all those other roles before I wrote the book. But even Ted, so if it was Ted really wanted to do it, it could be 12-1. If Ted's the one, we're going to do it. But one of the things he did, one of the things he did, and I saw him do this more than once, he would say, I think we should do X, Y, Z, and I want you guys to tell me why we shouldn't. And I'll listen to all your reasons why you think we shouldn't, and then I'll make my decision. And apparently before my time, we wrote about this in the book, he did that with CNN. CNN at the time was a crazy idea. There were no other 24-hour news networks.
Oh, he did that as in, here's the idea, CNN, tell me no. Like that kind of thing?
And he said, you have until 5 o'clock to come to my office and tell me why it's a bad idea. And that they needed as much time as they could because it was a bad idea for so many reasons. And basically he took them all in. He said, I've heard all the reasons. I get it, but I still want to do it.
And do you find
so that was kind of a cool way to do it.
Do you find that people, and it's unfair to ask for generalizations, but like in your experience in leadership positions, like aggregated across so many instances, do you find that people have a natural bravery to want to speak up, or is that something that's because it's scary? Like that, and for you yourself, is that something like, did you have to cultivate that kind of confidence to be like, I'm going to offer my opinion? Or were you somebody who's kind of always felt naturally possessed of like, no, I'm here to be useful and it's not useful for me to have nothing to say?
Yeah, these are great questions. And I probably hate to give wishy-washy answers. I'm probably somewhere in between.
Sure.
I grew up in a house where we had pretty robust dinner conversations. I did get an MBA. I'll drop the H-bomb. I went to Harvard, got my MBA. But the only reason I'm saying that is
somewhere in Cambridge. No need to discuss.
Greater Boston.
Yeah.
But they use the case method there, and it's a Socratic method.
They really do. That's their thing, right?
So half your grade is class participation. So if you don't raise your hand and say something, you won't pass. And so there's 90 people in your class, 90, and you've got to sort of get in, is what we say. You got to raise your hand and get in and say something. So that's good training for that. And then before you know it, I'm in rooms with Ted Turner, and you have to speak up. But I've chaired some boards, nonprofit boards, and I'll look around the table. There are people who will go 5 meetings without talking.
Yeah.
And, they wouldn't be there if we didn't think they had something to add.
Yeah.
And so I didn't feel in that setting that it was appropriate to sort of cold call people the way they did at business school.
Yeah, yeah.
But sometimes you could see someone almost literally like kind of moving their hand a little
Yeah.
bit but not raising it. I'd say, so Jordan, was there something you meant to say? Because I want to make sure before we move on. So I would try to pull that out of people. And then there's some people you wish wouldn't speak up quite as much as they do. That they just can't help themselves, and they're
Which
talking
might have
to be
something to
heard.
do with the other people who don't say anything at all.
Exactly. So again, in 12 Angry Men, there's a lot of silence at the beginning.
Yeah.
A lot, right? And you don't know anything about these characters. You don't know their names. There's 2 names shared at the very end of the film.
Right.
It's brilliant that way, I think. But one of the ways I identify with Henry Fonda is I sense from the get-go he's sizing them up. Not in a bad way, just really trying to understand who might. And, he calls for a second vote at one point. Mm-hmm. He calls for a few votes, but the time he says let's vote again, you could tell he was looking around and he thought he might have moved somebody. Mm-hmm. He also did something at the very end that was way more daring probably than I would have done. Where it's how was it? They were thinking about going with a hung jury, and he said, "We'll do it one more time, and if you all agree, then I'll change my vote."
Yeah.
It's amazing. Anyway.
One thing, it was so in the current lens, it was fascinating to watch Henry Fonda because he is at once like the sort of empathy and the perspective that we don't reflexively grant people often these days. He is the sort of like, I feel like he is like what my mom wants as like this hearkening back to a more patient America, to a more empathetic and open-eared America. Then at the same time too, there's this fascinating, again, this perverted, like brain poison 2024 lens. You're looking at him and you can see why everybody in the room is getting a little pissed off at him. Because he's like, how can you say that like this person didn't see what they said they saw? He's like, I'm just saying it's possible. And he says it over and over again. And I was like, there is, if you red pill yourself and you listen to this guy, this is also not InfoWars. Like, you're listening to him, and it's this, like the devil, and I hate the devil's advocate thing, but, like, the devil's advocate, I feel like, point of view on juror number 8, on Henry Fonda, is when he's like, it's possible. It's these, you can hear, like, a certain kind of way of thinking latch onto that, and it's the do your research, follow the breadcrumbs sort of QAnon-y thing that happens. Like, listen, don't believe your eyes or ears. You make your own truth out there, like, because anything's possible. And so listening to that now, I was like, oh, this absolutely has never occurred to me watching this. But I was like, holy shit, there is a faction of people who could watch this now and be like, Henry Fonda's my man, and I'm a Boogaloo boy. Like, he's right. Could be possible.
That had not occurred to me. Yeah, I was stuck on the, reasonable doubt thing, but you're absolutely right. And you can see how it sort of triggered some of the people in the room.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, what are you talking about? All this mumbo jumbo. These are the facts. Well, she said she saw it.
I wanted to hear from you about somebody who has worked in media for so long and who has a media venture like all of their own now. Like, I feel like so much of what makes optimism difficult to really grab onto is the precariousness of information and fact itself, where it feels like you grab on to a latch of it, like on the boulder, on the rock climbing wall, and you have a path that you've mapped out. Like, you map out your route on those walls, and you go from one to one to one to get you to the top. You grab them, and they just keep dissolving under your hands. It's like, but this was supposed to be a fact. And so I wanted to hear from you in an information hellscape like the one we live in now. Sort of, how do you think about, how do you, juror number 8, consider that? Like, tell me about optimism and facts these days. Please.
You feel better? That was amazing what you just described. I had not thought about it in that light, or the Henry Fonda.
I had never thought before about him as this agent of chaos. But then I was watching last night, I was like, oh my God, agent of chaos. Oh,
yes, okay.
God.
So there's a lot in what you just said. So where to start? In terms of news consumption, media consumption, social media consumption, there's no doubt in my mind, I have some serious issues with the business models, the practices of some of these social media platforms, for sure. I have some serious ethical issues with the various news outlets that I don't think, vet the stories the way they used to. I have big issues with, I'm older than you and older than probably a lot of your listeners, but when I was a kid, there was this very bright line in both print and video and radio journalism between news and commentary or editorial.
Yeah.
Very bright. Yeah. They would put this big old lower third graphic, editorial. And that's gone in large part. And I think that's a big part of the problem, because it's like, well, if so-and-so said this, it must be, it's like, no, that they were expressing their opinion on these facts. I think that's a big problem. It used to be
there
we
are
had
whole
these sort of
opinion
safe
hours.
harbors.
Like on Fox, there's like, well, all right, that's our opinion block from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. So that's not our news block. Those shows are inherently, no, that whole hour, that 4 hours, that's opinion.
Right. And I would say that the outlets on the left are doing something pretty similar.
It's
just
sort
of
absolutely.
We got to play this. If we can't beat them, we got to join them. And it was frustrating. I will tell you, I was at Turner when Fox News started, and Ted's thing was always CNN's going to be about the news. We're not going to be about personalities. We're going to give the straight news right down the middle. And then Fox launched, and their original tagline was, "We report, you decide."
Yeah. I remember "We report, you decide."
Yeah, and Ted was like, "Oh, we should have had that," and right. So anyway,
what a fascinating sidecar to history. Amazing.
Yeah. And so, I'll tell you another funny thing. So Ted had this huge rivalry with Rupert Murdoch. He challenged him to a boxing match and all this stuff. Truly. And when Fox News launched, they bought billboards. A huge billboard literally right across from CNN Center in Atlanta that faced CNN Center. The only people who could see that billboard were CNN employees.
Wait, and in Atlanta, they're not based in Atlanta. They're a New York organization.
Right. They just plopped it. It was totally on purpose. Anyway, great rivalry. That was fun.
Yeah, that's
okay. The other thing is with social media. One of the things about social media, I mentioned the platforms and their business practices. At the same time, a lot of this is on us, in my opinion. We are we choose who we follow, we choose who we share, we choose who we like, and the algorithms respond. And if we decide to let our feeds fill with people that get us riled up, that spew hate, half-truths, non-truths, that's on us. Now, we can't. The really challenging part is we can't control what other people do, and that's a big issue. But in terms of our own mental well-being and sanity, I think we can control a lot of it by how we manage our own feeds. And I've heard people describe it to your media diet is like your food diet, and I always say, well, yeah, I agree, and I hate blue cheese, and if you give me a spoon of it, I'm not going to eat it. But we'll eat some of that the figurative blue cheese on social media just because we do, or someone sent it to us, and so I think a lot of it's on us, but it's a very unique challenge to our day and age.
Well, it's kind of funny to watch this and to watch 12 Angry Men and kind of see it as it's also like sort of a rendering of utopia, because like in the end everyone comes around to their humanity in some way. Like the racist goes on the grossest racist monologue possible, and steadily there's that beautiful like stage play moment of the camera pulls wide and the whole room of this feels very mid-century, like this like silent protest they all wage, like every man like stands up and like walks away from the table and turns their back to him, and every guy does until like the last is sitting facing him. And the racist is spewing vitriol at Bagley. And he's like, don't you see? Like, don't you hear me? And the man across from him, he's like, juror probably number 3. He's like, I do hear you. Now sit down and don't open your mouth again. And he just like, with every man, every peer of his who he recognizes as a valid human, every white guy in that room rejects him. And he basically goes and puts himself in timeout. He goes and sits at the little desk in the corner and faces away from everybody and looks sad the rest of the movie. And then even Lee J. Cobb, he finally reveals his underlying motivation, which is this boy allegedly killed his father, and he abused his own son to make him the man he wanted him to be, and now he hasn't heard from his kid in 2 years. So it's
Yeah.
this, he breaks down into this
Heartbreaking.
sobbing, like you pour your whole life into your kids, and then he breaks down into his own arms and crying, and he's like, not guilty, because he realizes he's been
That was pretty dramatic.
projecting his own abandonment by his child because of the way he treated him onto this boy.
You're not going to intimidate me. I'm entitled to my opinion. Rotten kids, you work your life out. No. Not guilty. Not guilty.
Kind of there before the grace of God go he, with like his
Right.
father, his son lashing out. And it's like,
Right.
you know, the movie ends with this like, God, like everybody and all the dickheads realized how they were wrong. And it's like, if that ain't a perfect world, I don't know what is. That's an optimism institute in that room.
Thank you. No, and I'm glad you mentioned, I'll try to connect some dots here. You mentioned the guys standing up and turning their back on Ed Begley's character. To me, that's what you do when you don't follow, you don't amplify.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these people on these extremes on social media, their oxygen is attention.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take away that attention and that oxygen, literally, like you said, the guy, Ed Begley, puts himself in timeout. He looks like such a small man.
Oh,
when
he can barely
deprived him
for the
he
rest
was
of the movie.
deprived of the all they did was deprive him of attention. Mm-hmm. It's like dog trainers. They tell you don't have to like. Well, I'd never had a well-trained dog, but they tell you you don't have to. You don't have to do this. You literally turn your back on the dog, and that's all they need to know that you're not happy with them. And the more we can turn our back on some of these shouting voices, and deprive them of that oxygen that they run on, I think that's a good thing.
It's time for a break, but we'll be right back with more optimism from Bill Burke. And then I will have one quick thing before we go about a new book, a forthcoming book from friend of the show, Anna Bogutskaya. So stick around at the end and we will talk a little bit about her new work, Feeding the Monster.
Alison Brie was the star of the Netflix series Glow.
Being a gorgeous lady of wrestling isn't easy.
Especially when it's time to get in the ring.
Wrestling is so interesting in that you can't do anything halfway. Okay, so now it's time to run at that woman's body and dive over her head first. Like, you can't do that halfway. You can't do that in slow motion.
Alison Brie on Tights and Fights.
Max Fun's Perfect Wrestling Podcast. Available now.
And if you don't listen,
I'll see you in the ring.
Hi, this is Biz, and this is the final season of One Bad Mother, a comedy podcast about parenting. This is going to be a year of celebrating all that makes this podcast and this community magical.
I'm so glad that I found your podcast. I just cannot thank you enough for just being the voice of reason as I'm trying to figure all of this out. Thank you, and cheers to your incredible show and the vision you had to provide this space for all of us.
This is still a show about life after giving life. And yes, there will be swears. You can find us on MaximumFun.org. And as always, you are doing a great job.
Welcome back to Feeling Seen, where today my co-host is Bill Burke, a former TCM general manager and current host of the Blue Sky podcast, a project from the Optimism Institute, which Bill also founded. We are going to jump right back into him sharing why he felt seen by 12 Angry Men, and in particular, Henry Fonda's character, Juror Number 8.
The other thing I'd say, too, that I liked, and one of the reasons maybe I felt somewhat seen, I struggle with where we are as a country in many ways, but I always try to come back to what we're supposed to be all about.
Mm-hmm.
And the jury system, I'll acknowledge there are no women on this jury. And
Yeah,
no
I mean, which
people of
feels like a
darker
very
skin.
1957 jury.
Very 1950s. But they only mention a few. They they get into quite a few of their professions. Remember what Henry Fonda was?
Architect.
He's an architect.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like, this has nothing to do with the law. Has
Yeah.
nothing to do with.
Yeah, he
right?
doesn't
He's
work
an architect.
for Cornell.
Jack Warden sells marmalade.
Yeah.
Fun fact. Really funny character, the ad agency guy.
Oh,
Let's
yeah.
run it up the flagpole. Let's put it on the doorstep and see if the cat licks it. You know,
Run up the flagpole and see who salutes.
he's like madman guy.
Yeah.
But the range of occupations. One guy's, the more sort of the working guy. He's like, oh, I just take orders. I can't remember. He's a plumber or something.
Yeah, he's like, I don't do much
It's just
supposing. I'm just a working man. Like, I leave the supposing to my bosses. And then the little
There you
man
go.
who just works at a bank. When he says, like, I got so mad at my coworker at the bank, it was like, oh, you work at a bank. Like, I get that for you. The football coach, the foreman's a football coach.
Yes, exactly. Oh, I love the foreman.
Oh, I forgot to tell you, I'm the assistant head coach at the Andrew J. McCorkle High School. Yeah, that's out in Queens.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, starting to move along real nicely. The whole line is just coming apart. And it starts to come down, cats and dogs, just like this. Just whoosh, right down. Well, that was murder, I swear I nearly bawled, just I couldn't go nowhere.
I don't know who I would trust with it, but I feel like I kind of want to see, like, every generation make 12 Angry Men. And I don't know who I would trust with it now, because, like, the line that this movie has to walk by being, it does proselytize. Like, there are beats of, like,
oh yeah,
this is what America can be and what it should be, but it doesn't ever feel treacly in the way that it does it. And I want to see this, like, this movie, like, fight now, just an hour 45 minutes of jurors screaming at, especially with how the courts have become a very present part of our lives and conversation, screaming at each other, and, like, still call it 12 Angry Men, but it's actually filled with 12 angry, broad diversity of people that you would find on a jury now. But, like, I think that's a thing I find surprising about this in the rewatch, is that those moments of, like, American idealism and Shining City on a hill kind of ethos, they don't feel like they're actually badgering you. They feel aspirational more than they feel like, hey, tisk tisk, don't you dare speak ill of the United States of America. Like, may the wings of liberty never lose a feather kind of thing.
No, that's one of the reasons I respond to it, I think, because I do think that those ideals are still worth pursuing, and they don't do it in such a heavy-handed way that it feels hokey, like you said, treacly. Great word. No, I think they did it'd have to be 6 angry men and 6 angry women, or at least something that adds to 12 or whatever number are on.
I would love to see 12 angry thems. I'd love to see 12 angry thems. And let's just dial this up to fucking 25.
Great title.
Yeah.
12 angry them. Jordan, you got to hang up and do this. What are you wasting time with me for? You've got the next big idea. 12 angry thems. That could be an SNL skit. That could be.
I want this narrative podcast. Like 20-minute episove real time to, like, it's just the recreation of 12 Angry Men, real time, 20-minute increments over the course of a night. We've got this.
Love it. Have you seen the series? Did you watch Jury Duty?
No, people loved that.
It's pretty great, and it's a total aside. It just happens to be a jury. Couldn't be more different from this movie, although there may be some flashes of it. As someone, you've been around making TV and film, I don't know how they pulled it off. You know the premise is there's one guy who's not an actor, and everyone around them is an actor, and this is a full 24/7 jury experience. They're in a hotel together, they're having meals together, and this guy doesn't know. In fact, I read later they had 2 or 3 or maybe 4 times where they got a few episodes in and it blew up and they had to start over with a new person. It's just very hard to pull off. Talk about incredible acting. You'll love it. You kind of feel sorry for the guy. A lot of us did when we watched, but then by the end you realize, that they handled it really well and they treated him fairly, because he's this lovely guy too. He's now, by the way, he's on a bunch of commercials now. He's turned it into a little career. He's always like the guy in the jury and like the Pringles commercial and stuff. It's kind of fun, but I highly recommend it.
Of being a juror.
Yeah.
Do you feel like in your conversations with people, like really framed around this, like Blue Sky Podcast, the Optimism Institute?
Yeah.
Is there a consistent thread of sort of hopefulness that you find among people in having long conversations with them? Like, is there a common point that's grounding us still that we can hang on to? Or is it kind of like a disparate constellation of granules of sort of positivity or hopefulness that you find among your guests?
It's fairly disparate, and the show by design, I have a pretty wide range of guests. Here are some commonalities. One, and I think it's one of the reasons I'm drawn to this, is I was a history major. I love reading history. And I had a wonderful older gentleman on, Kevin Kelly, great writer. He was
Kevin Kelly, one of the Wired founding editors?
Bingo.
I worked at Wired for 7 years.
Stop. He's a mensch. He's just the nicest guy. But he has a new, well, it's not new anymore. It's probably been out about a year, book called Excellent Advice I Wish I'd Known When I Was Younger. Yeah. And it's him. He collects quotes. He comes up with his own. He's little goof. Everything from, if you can't find something in your house and then you find it, don't put it back where you found it. Put it back where you first looked. Like these quirky, weird things. But
that feels like that Baz Luhrmann song, Always Wear Sunscreen. Like where it's just him giving advice over a pop beat for like a few minutes.
That's what this book is. But one of the things he says in the book that I use all the time is, if you only read the news, you'll think things have never been worse. But if you read history, you'll realize things have never been better. And so for one of the threads I see in a lot of people I talk to is they're able to take the really bad problems we have today and put it in a historical context. So when somebody says today, this country's never been more divided than we are today.
Right.
I bring up the Civil War, where we killed each other by the tens of thousands. I bring up the summer of 1968 when the Vietnam protests and the race riots around the country would make what's happening today pale in comparison.
Rachel Maddow has made a whole next stage of her career out of being sort of like the historical contextualizer with like the miniseries podcast that she does.
Yes. I don't know if you ever read Heather Cox Richardson, but she does a great job of that too. Letters from an American, #1 newsletter on Substack, by the way.
Oh, wow.
So that's a thread. Another thread, just sort of a personality type, I guess, or one of the things that surprised me, almost everyone I interviewed is very... It's an overused expression. They're kind of lifelong learners. They're always reading. They're always trying to learn new things. They're always often trying to learn from people on the other side of a political issue or a scientific issue. That's a theme. Another theme is I find some of the most optimistic people are immigrants. And if you think just the act of leaving where you live to go somewhere else unknown, but with a hope towards things getting better, I think immigrants, by definition, are optimist entrepreneurs. You think you've got an idea that's going to make the world better, and you pursue it. The great combo is immigrant entrepreneurs, and that tends to be, our history as a country. So many of our great entrepreneurs were first-generation immigrants. We're seeing that again now. So that's a thread. But a lot of it, too, is one of the things I try to do on the show is I don't just have people on who just think everything's hunky-dory. In fact, I have people on to try to talk about some of our biggest challenges, like climate change, like immigration, like political division. But they approach these issues with a sense of optimism, with a solutions orientation, with here's what's working, we just need to do more of it, here's what we need to stop doing. And because it's my belief, and others have shared this on the show, that the biggest danger is getting to the point of despair and losing hope. Because at that point, why bother? If you think climate change is a done deal and it's too late, then what are you going to do about it? Nothing. Why would you? So keeping these ideas, this sense of hope, this sense of... And that, for me, a true optimist doesn't sit around and assume things will get better.
Mm-hmm.
They assume things will get better because we're all going to make an effort to make them better.
Mm-hmm.
I was honored to give a high school graduation speech about a year ago, and trying to think, what do I tell a bunch of 18-year-olds? And as from the generation that's left them with this big pile of mess. Yeah. But one of the things I said was, every generation, welcome to the club. Every generation inherits a mess from the one before. And I thought back to, I'll age myself. I graduated from high school 40 years ago, 1984. Mm-hmm. And in 1984, we had apartheid, we had the Cold War, we had this thing called AIDS. I don't even think it had a name yet when I graduated, but I was in suburban New York, and it was ravaging the gay community in New York City.
I just will say an aside about that. I feel like the sort of diminishment in our consciousness of AIDS as a population-destroying event is one of the great failings of how we consider and disseminate history.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. There are survivors of that are still not recovered from the
it was
capacity
horrible.
And scope of loss of that time. So I'm glad to hear you.
It was horrible. Yeah, no. What else? So when I said, in the environment, okay, we whiffed on climate change. That's on us. But when I was graduating high school, it was acid rain and the ozone layer.
Yeah.
Okay?
The ozone layer.
And that was a serious thing.
Yeah.
But we fixed it. We banned chlorofluorocarbons or whatever.
Chlorofluorocarbons, yes.
Yeah, thank you. So the point I was trying to make was that these things all got addressed very effectively. Apartheid doesn't exist anymore. We fixed the ozone layer. We fixed acid rain. Mm-hmm. We found cures for AIDS. Mm-hmm. All these things happened, and they didn't just happen. They happened because young people like these graduates got out and did something. They marched. When I was in college back in my day, the marches on campus were for divestment in South Africa.
Right.
To end apartheid.
Yeah.
Okay. These things make a difference. People get out and vote. They work. They challenge. And that, to me, is why the world continues to improve, because generation after generation has this hope and this active optimism that makes things better. And so my attempt is to make sure that we don't, in these subsequent, younger generations today and beyond, don't lose that sense. And one of the guys I interviewed, and then I'll stop talking, a guy named Charles Kenny, has written several books, including one called Getting Better. And when I interviewed him, I talked about, I have kids in their late 20s, and they have a lot of friends who say they don't want to have children because they don't want to bring people in the world that's going to end in 30 years because of climate change or something of the like. Perfectly fine choice not to have children for any number of reasons, but if it's because you think the world's going to end in 30 years because of climate change, then I think we have a real challenge. And Charles said, yeah, that really frustrates me too, because this generation coming up will be the greatest generation in the history of the world. I thought, wait, tap the brakes here. What are you talking about? And he said, no. He said, listen. He said they're going to be the largest in number.
Yeah.
They'll be the most tech savvy. They're the most socially accepting, tolerant. And they're going to live the longest lives. Lifespans continue. He said, so if we would just get out of their way and keep them optimistic and hopeful, they're going to change the world. They're going to fix climate change. They're going to do all these things unless they fizzle out of hope.
Yeah.
And don't stay optimistic. And I heard that and I was like, okay, maybe they could be the greatest generation. And I shared that with these young high school graduates to try to inspire them. So that's my message.
I feel like the thing I will kind of go out on and sort of like our concluding point.
Yes.
Then I rewatched this obviously for our conversation, and it came on the heels. Like rewatching this came on the heels of I went to a lovely dinner event, nice people, it was like wonderful host. The room turned into at a certain point, and this is when my eyes started glazing over, kind of like left coast liberals waxing conceptual on like rights in a way that was like progressive and positive, but it was like, okay, this room of like well-heeled, mostly academics talking about like the abstractification of sort of Israel-Palestine and racism. I was like, this suddenly became what makes me nervous about being in a room of rich people. And where it was like, you can have a conversation from a 30,000 foot view because you sort of in several ways exist 30,000 feet above the general population, above the 99%. And I found that watching 12 Angry Men, I was so much more at ease with how the discourse was playing out in that room, with people just being pissed off and shouting and moving away from the trappings of decorum, that I was like, this is a fucking conversation. Like, this is people hashing shit out and getting shit done in a way that the lovely Had a Great Time at Dinner gathering started to feel a bit like I needed to dissociate to just, like, keep my mind right from all of this, like, glad handing of each other's good points.
Right. That's really interesting. No, and I think, like you said, there's a lot of screaming in this movie, but it's a different kind than what we're used to now, where it's sort of, now it feels like kind of the loudest voice wins, or the most clever put down wins.
Which we absolutely have in this movie. We have loud voices and clever put downs.
Yeah. But they're working towards, like, I had a person on the podcast who's written a book about political division. He said one of the biggest differences now, obviously we've always had differences politically, obviously. The difference now is called affective bias with an A, affective, where we don't just hate the idea, we hate the person with the idea.
Right.
And that's a big jump. Now, there's clearly some animosity between the folks in this room, but by the end, it's more like they're frustrated with the idea. They're frustrated with, how could you think that this guy's not guilty?
Yeah.
It's not always – one guy keeps calling him, you bleeding hearts. You look at you with your hearts bleeding all over the table.
Even he apologizes to the juror next to him who grew up in a poor neighborhood, and he's like, "Hey, I wasn't talking about you. Like, I was just talking like generally, like when he was talking, because he's like, you voted not guilty in the secret ballot. Like, of course it was you. You're from there." And he's like, "Yeah, well, it wasn't in me." And so to watch him like be embarrassed, like feel shame around his incorrect accusation, like on the personal level, he's like, "Oh, guy, I didn't mean it," but like on the grandiose conceptual level, he's you bleeding hearts.
Yeah. They all 12 of them got their points across. All 12 of them had a voice. All 12 of them spoke up. And in the end, all 12 of them agreed. So somewhat happy ending. And again, the kid might have done it.
Yeah.
I just thought that was a really cool thing at the end. It's not like they proved what happened, but they did their job, that there was a reasonable doubt, and they shouldn't send an 18-year-old to the electric chair.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for coming on.
Jordan, it was a great pleasure.
Expansive conversational trip with me.
Yes. And I'm glad I gave you an excuse to rewatch a classic film. Wait, did your wife and younger person watch with you in the end?
They did. They sat and watched. They were often on their phones, but and that's they do that in movies they love. So that's not the worst condemnation, but it was I think my wife started to end it of well, I don't think that was as boring as I thought it was going to be. And then the other was, it was more like so, my work continues. My work continues.
Sounds like progress.
Yeah, I will not be deterred. I'm gonna sit them down through goddamn All About Eve before they know it.
Inherit the Wind. Another great hot courtroom. Very hot in that one.
Thank you so much for coming on and taking the time with us today, Bill. I truly appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Bill Burke for coming on. You can take a listen to Blue Sky to get a little dose of that realistic optimism Bill brought with him to this conversation, and it is available everywhere that you get your podcasts. As for 12 Angry Men, it's on a ton of streaming services and very much worth your time. It holds up. Having just rewatched it again, God, what a picture, as they say. And now, that one quick thing before I go, exciting news whenever we get to update you guys about the works and projects of previous guests on the show who we enjoy so much, and among just Hall of Fame guest, Hall of Fame person, Anna Bogutskaya. Her previous book, Unlikable Female Characters, is why she was on the show before, and now she has another book coming out called Feeding the Monster. It is available for pre-order now. I believe it goes on sale in August, but it is available for pre-order now. And as we know from so many people promoting their stuff online, those pre-orders super matter. They make a huge difference in the success of a book. So if you like what Anna talked about on this show, and you like other work that Anna does, I can't recommend her enough. And Feeding the Monster is about that the age-old love of horror and monsters and the macabre and, perhaps the gory and the gruesome out there. And, what it says about us. There's kind of, a snap reaction among some, even as popular as the genre is once again today. Goes up and down in waves over time, but it's very popular right now. Big hit genre. And sometimes you meet the occasional person of you profess your love of the outlandish and the profane. They're like, God, that's, crazy. Like, what's wrong with you? How could you? Like, what are your nightmares like? Sort of situation. What do you think about in your free time? And what Anna seeks to do with Feeding the Monster, this is from the description of the book, is examine how horror responds to and fuels our feelings of fear, anxiety, pain, hunger, and power. Anna Bogutskaya, horror scholar. The new book is Feeding the Monster. I recommend it to you. And she has the cosign of Feeling Seen. An official, if we had a wax imprint, we would be putting it on Feeding the Monster by Anna Bogutskaya. So yeah, that's my little one quick thing. We love friends of the show. And that's our show for today. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at FeelingSeenPod, or send us an email at feelingseen@MaximumFun.org. If you want to follow me, I am Jor Crew on Twitter. Our theme music is by Andrew Epen. Our show is produced by the inimitable Marissa Flaxbart. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher, and this is a production of Maximum Fun.
Maximum Fun,
a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows, supported directly by you.